Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for 𝗗cie�〗 We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. Charlie, how are you? You had a little time off here. Thanks for holding down the fort last week and giving a pre-Four Nations podcast and getting folks ready for the break. And now we're ready for the final 27 of the regular season.
Yeah, good to be back with you. Much needed recharge session mentally for the both of us. And so thank you guys for your patience last week, only dropping one, but kind of a lot-ish to talk about leading up to it, especially the Four Nations. I know we'll get to it in a little bit, but that was not a tournament I was particularly excited about, like leading up to it.
You weren't excited? You didn't think it would deliver?
Leading up to it, my excitement level was just kind of meh. But then on Monday, when the practice lines started filing in, I was like, all right, let's get this show on the road. And it has wildly exceeded my expectations.
All right. So I'm going to let you, if you want to pull an audible, do you want to go Four Nations
now?
Let's
do it. Let's do it right now.
Let's get right to it. All right.
Yeah.
It is what everybody's talking about in the hockey world and beyond, which I think that's probably the most important part of this equation. I hear a lot of people saying, wow, credit the NHL. Look what they have done. They put together this tournament. Take a look at what's going on in the NBA. It happens to have this highly watched game on Saturday night up against the NBA All-Star Weekend. That was a dismal situation. You had LeBron not taking a picture in his uniform. I mean, it was a joke. But that being said, I think they're missing out here. I think the credit goes to the NHL players in large part for pushing for this. They are the ones in the last CBA. And oh, by the way, there are talks going on right now, not official talks, but talks about the next CBA. And they realized that the world stage is the place that the league and the sport needs to grow. If you look back to the NBA, everybody talks about the Dream Team and the impact that the Dream Team had on not only the NBA and the salaries and the popularity, but the popularity globally. And we see that now in the National Basketball Association, how many players from Europe are prominent players in the association. Same goes for the NHL. These NHL players have been pushing for this over the last couple CBAs. No NHL owner wants to shut down their business for 2 weeks. And we're going to see it back in the Olympics next year. There's going to be a pause of at least 3 weeks for the National Hockey League. And that's, after the NFL comes to a halt and, the stage and the canvas is set. But look at what it's doing. Yes, the NHL is not playing for 2 weeks, but nobody can tell you that the NHL is not in a better place today than it was 10 days ago. It's absolutely in a better place, and it has international competition, albeit only Four Nations, that is, by and large, and the players, the way they've played those games, is the reason why people are talking about hockey, and maybe that will translate to more support at the NHL level as we embark on the last 2 months of the regular season.
Oh, amen, Pat. That was so good. And I totally agree with the NHLPA deserves a huge bulk of the credit because there were literally stoppages in the NHL schedule with the lockouts because the players wanted it so bad. And it was one of those things that they eventually had to cave and forfeit their opportunity to play in some of the Olympic games in the previous, 2013 lockout that prevented them from participating in tournaments like this. And Brandon Hagel had an incredible quote yesterday. He was talking about how he put his head down for the night, the night before the first game. And he was thinking to himself, man, if tomorrow is basically like an all-star game feel, he's like, I'm going to be so out of place because my mentality is I'm going to run my head through a wall tomorrow. And that is exactly the kind of mentality that we saw not only from Brandon Hagel, but the entire in the entire tournament. Like, this has been an incredible tournament to watch as far as intensity and competition goes. And when we talked to Connor Bedard too on Tuesday, asked him his thoughts about the Four Nations tournament, and he's like, this is probably the highest level of hockey that we've ever seen. And it's like, there was some concern over whether it was going to get to that level, and it was just going to kind of be, let's just set the stage.
Or how it could happen instantaneously, because there were no like prelims leading up. Like, it was Four Nations playing 3 round robin games, not a lot of runway to ramp yourself up to that level. But I think the fact that these players come in, in the best shape, they're 2/3 of the way through their season, so they're in great shape, barring any nagging injuries. But there still is, the light bulb has to be flipped on. The switch needs to be made. Are we competing at this level, or, as we saw, are we competing through the roof? And to the NHL players' credit and all the players that are in the Four Nations, they freaking answered the bell and then some.
Absolutely. And how about the Saturday night game between USA, Canada? 3 fights, first 9 seconds. But as you mentioned, you got NBA All-Star Weekend, and that was a total dud of, if anyone ended up watching that. No NFL. NFL season is over. So there was literally nothing to watch on TV unless you're a college basketball fan. But it was 7 o'clock. 10.4 million people in North America ended up watching this game between Canada and USA. And the fact that it was such fireworks right out of the gate, I think both teams, I'm sure there was some sort of statement that Team USA wanted to impart on that game as well, because of the whole booing with the national anthem. So I'm sure they wanted to be drivers of that. But the fact that Team Canada and Team USA were like, no, let's do this. 3 fights, first 9 seconds. That, to me, encapsulated the entire mentality of the NHL players that were participating in this tournament, because it's like, no, we're not here just to put on a show or whatever. Like, we're here, and it's almost like they were trying to make a point. Like, this is how desperately we wanted international play for the last 14 plus years or whatever it was. And it's like, obviously you can't fight in the Olympics, so this is definitely a unique set of rules where they were allowed to do this. But I think it was like this pent-up energy of no international play for the last decade and a half. And it all culminated in this game between USA and Canada, and it couldn't have been more perfect.
How about the fact, as the story comes out, that the physicality and dropping the gloves in the opening seconds was brought up on a text chain?
Yeah.
And then you talked about Brandon Hagel's comments. How about Hagel's comments? We play, and I'm paraphrasing, we're playing for the maple leaf on our chest, not for the cameras. We don't have text chains. I was like, whoa. I mean, so like it was really incredible to see where these players put this. And I will say it's a made for TV event. It's not like, what was your favorite year of the Four Nations, face off? It's like, this was created, and it was kind of a launching point for the NHLPA and the NHL to come together without the IIHF and to create a non-Olympic format that carries some gravitas. And man, did it ever. And we're going to see the World Cup come back in 2028. And it sounds like we're going to see at least 8 countries participate. Now, that's going to be interesting how that whole thing plays out. But everybody's worried about the timing. I want to just talk quickly my idea about the timing, because there's some people that are like, the Canada Cup used to be played in August, September. And I do like the NHL pausing for the Olympics like it will next year. And I don't mind it stopping for a couple of weeks, maybe 2.5, for a Four Nations / World Cup tournament either. Because it feels like it's hockey season, right? It's February. It's cold in most NHL cities. I do think you got to think about the NFL being done. but I would consider, because the NFL is going to go to an 18-game schedule, and they're going to play, in all likelihood, the Super Bowl on the Sunday before President's Day, and then the rest of the nation gets around. I mean, that's where this is going for them. I would, if I'm the NHL, I'd take advantage of that week prior to the Super Bowl, where we've just seen the AFC and the NFC title games, and there's a week plus before they arrive in the Super Bowl host city. I would start your tournament du jour, whether it's the Olympics or what have you. I would start it that Thursday or Friday before the dark Super Bowl weekend, and I would begin to play it there. I would realize and respect that people are keeping tabs on who's going to play in the Super Bowl, the health of certain players, maybe some of the media storylines. But I think there is plenty of time there to pick and choose 5 or 6 days. And again, you avoid Super Bowl Sunday, but you work around those 2 weeks to take advantage of that time. And then maybe you play one more week, and then you're only kind of dark. I mean, you're dark for 2 to 3 weeks, but you're taking advantage of that 1 week that the NFL is not using, which is the week before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I really like that idea. And I think the only downside to so we know that the NHL is going to have a World Cup in 2028 and 2032 or whatever it is. So that's already been agreed upon. As I was looking this up in real time, I couldn't figure out, are they for sure doing those in the middle of the season, or is that going to be similar to the previous World Cup where it was in August? Remember when we had Team North America?
Yeah, I don't know if that has been determined yet, because the commissioner announced it's up to cities to make bids now. So obviously this is kind of a fluid situation, and I think they're trying to take a lot of what is happening in Four Nations and applying it to the next tournament. If you're asking these players to answer the bell like they have, you've got to account for injury, and we are accounting for injury in these in this Four Nations tournament. And we're also seeing kind of the ambiguity of the Four Nations roster. Like, it doesn't look like we are going to see Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes was practicing today as we tape this on Wednesday in Vancouver with his teammates. It looks like he's getting ready for the start of their season, their regular season commencing, being back in action on Saturday. And it doesn't look like he's going to be a part of Team USA on Thursday unless something happens, in the next handful of hours regarding a player on that roster and their availability to go on Thursday night. So there's some things they need to clean up when they are playing the World Championships. I don't know if it is going to be in a February type of pause, or if they would like to do it like it's been done in the past prior to the NHL regular season.
Yeah, because it's such a unique situation. This is certainly a learning lesson for the NHL and NHLPA on how to handle the World Cup of Hockey moving forward. And I think too, when they open it up to 8 teams, there's going to be more of a formality with the rules. Like right now, with it being only 4 teams, round robin, like Sweden, Finland, they only played 3 games. So it was like you pop in, have a few practices, play 3 games, then you're out. But if the World Cup of Hockey is going to be a consistent thing, which it has been in the past in hockey, there's kind of already a template set. Whereas the Four Nations, this has never been done before. So I almost don't mind that the fluidity of the rules. And by the way, it bothers me that Quinn Hughes is not going to be allowed to play unless there is an injury or an illness. Like, this guy was literally part of the original roster and did not. It's not like Team USA is trying to drop in somebody late in the game because it's like reinforcement, whatever. Part of me,
but you know what? But that's unfortunately a byproduct of why Quinn Hughes isn't being allowed, because they didn't want teams to stockpile certain types of players to play certain types of styles in certain games, like bringing in having a thumper on your roster that you're only going to employ for the US-Canada game, and you're going to take him off the ice for Finland and Sweden because you don't feel the need of the physicality of that player, or they lack offense, or whatever it may be. So they have to fine-tune the rules. Ultimately, you want the best players out there, and Quinn Hughes is one of the best players this league has to offer.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because he is legitimately one of the most exciting players to watch, just the way he can dance on the blue line and run a power play. And it's unfortunate that this tournament has provided such exposure to some of the casual fans that don't really watch hockey. And it's like Quinn Hughes is available to play, but because of the rules, they're not going to let him play. And it's a missed opportunity. Not only, obviously, if you're Team Canada, you're going to push back on these rules because it doesn't make sense why you could just drop in one of a 90-plus point defenseman on Team USA's roster for the championship game. But just from a hockey fan standpoint, it's frustrating that he's available, but you can't play.
Yeah. So 𝗗cie𝗰𝗶 is going to play, right?
Yeah.
And Charlie McAvoy is out.
Yep.
With an infection in his shoulder, which is a kind of an odd.
Well, they
injury.
said he has a severe sprained AC joint too that they found, and it doesn't sound like the situation was handled properly. So that's something to monitor if you're a Boston Bruins fan. But so essentially, I wonder, Pat, if this could happen. If there's some sort of injury or illness to Team USA on Thursday morning to a forward, would Team USA be able to fly in Quinn Hughes, and can they go 11-7, or does it have to be replaced with a forward? I don't know. I mean,
yeah, and is it even geographically possible for him to, you know what I mean? Like
right.
At 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. morning skate, it's easily a 5.5 hour flight plus from Vancouver, to Boston. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Again, these are some of the things they need to clean up. And the McAvoy loss, I think, is huge because I think he exemplifies what made it work for the U.S. in that game on Saturday. The physicality that they brought to this very talented team, Canada, that, played more on the perimeters and outside the dots than inside the dots. So the question to, I think, everybody should be, it's hard to beat the same team twice in a week. And when you take McAvoy out, who was, I think, a big part of Saturday night's success, you add Makar, who's the best defenseman in the National Hockey League, in my opinion. Quinn Hughes up in the air. Like, even though it's going to be a Boston TD Garden pro-US fan situation, there's going to be 30 to 40-ish% of that building that is rooting for Canada. It's going to be difficult for the U.S., I think, to win twice in less than a week against a highly touted, very talented Canada team.
I'm right there with you. I'm a little nervous that Team Canada might win this game. And I was looking at some of the odds right before. It is literally a pick'em game right now. Like, there is no favorite. Like, that's how close it is. Here's where I'll say the difference has to be in goal for Team USA. Connor Hellebuyck does not have a great track record in big games in the postseason. I think partly that has something, mainly maybe, or primarily has something to do with the fact that he always, his regular season workload is always very heavy. And so by the playoffs, it doesn't feel like he has that same type of energy or freshness to his game. Jordan Binnington, he's given up like at least one goal in all three of the games where you're like, he should probably have had that one. And so if you're Team USA and the goaltending tilts the other way, or it becomes relatively even, Team Canada has a really decent chance to win this hockey game. I also wanted to throw this in here to kind of put a Blackhawks tie in this. I know 𝗵𝗀 𝗟𝗏 played for Team Finland. He was a healthy scratch in the final game. I think only played like 9 minutes of ice time in the second game, so he was not a factor at all. I'm convinced he's dealing with something, Pat, because over I think he had 3 maintenance days over a 3-week span for Chicago. And it even happened as recently as a few days prior to him going and reporting to Montreal for the Four Nations tournament. So I don't think.
And Charlie, he was playing his best hockey to date. For him to take time off when he was on a heater is also a cause for concern or to raise your eyebrow.
Right. Like, I don't think 𝗟𝗏 was the 13th forward for Finland when he's like legitimately a top 6 guy on that team and didn't get any ice, barely got 10 minutes of ice time in the second game if he wasn't dealing with something. So I wouldn't be surprised if that had something to do with it, because I just have a hard time believing that 𝗟𝗏 was the 13th best forward for Finland in a short tournament like that.
All right. And, okay, a couple things. The way the U.S. is honoring 𝗵𝗏 𝗠𝗏 throughout this tournament is just, it's class upon class. I mean, it's what it's what the hockey family does in time of need. We saw it when the tragic occurrence happened when they passed away this past summer. We've seen it with the Philadelphia Flyers, how they invited 𝗠𝗏's dad to practices, how Johnny's dad was with Team USA in Montreal before the tournament started. I think Bill Guerin has done an incredible job of not only picking this roster, knowing the type of player, because it's not easy to fill out those 2 rosters for the U.S. and Canada. And he's done a hell of a job. And all the things, even bringing in the Modanos and different players from Roumeliotis and players from Team USA's past to be a part of that family. And I think that you wonder how the emotion gets flipped like that. It's the hours and days leading up when you see 𝗠𝗏's jersey being awarded to the best player of the previous game. You see his dad. You look into the eyes of a Micah Roumeliotis or a Mike Modano. You hear the stories of Guerin's team and what they did to win and beat Team Canada on the international stage. You hear all that, and it's bottled up inside of you. That's what happens in the first 10 seconds of that game on Saturday.
No question. The class of Team USA to think of honoring him in that way is so special, and it's so sad at the same time, because Johnny Hockey was he was such an important face for Team USA as he was growing. It was like him, Patrick Kane, and Austin Matthews were like the 3 faces of Team USA. And so it was just a reminder that it's like, man, he would probably be a first line guy or second line guy on this team. And so the fact that they're honoring him in this way adds to the emotional effect for Team USA outside of just the pent up energy of wanting to have some best on best in international play as of late.
All right. So the stage is set Thursday night, Boston. The game will be on ESPN, and not only the hockey world, but as we've seen, a lot of the sports world is paying attention to this, and rightfully so. So are the Hawks. And we were at practice, as again, they're going to be off on Thursday. They'll practice Friday before they make their way to Columbus. And I asked Anders Sorensen, like, look, we all know there's a step up in class between the NHL regular season and like there's 2 or 3 steps up to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And as you advance each round, things get even more escalated. We've seen that in this tournament, the Four Nations, how they've gone from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. And, you know, when you're talking about compete level with your team each and every week, and you're talking about bringing the physicality and finishing your checks, and, you know, we need our A game because the team we're playing out there, if they've got their A game, it's going to be a tough sled. You know, it's going to be tough sledding for us. So can the Blackhawks and their coaching staff can, watching the way the U.S. and Canada compete, and Finland and Sweden to a degree as well, and what they put out there, that product, can that bridge the gap? Can that be the catalyst to raise the bar of the regular season energy level that you bring? And in a short answer, or, to make his answer short, he said, yeah, it can, or he hopes it can.
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly, how much impact it might have on the Blackhawks in the final 2 months of the season. But I do think watching the Four Nations tournament, if you're a guy like Frank Nazar or Connor Bedard or Landon Slaggert, Alex Vlasic, you're watching that type of hockey and you're saying, this is the type of level that we need to get to, not just individually, but as a team. Obviously, it's a few steps up because there's so much like Canada's fourth line, Braden Point, Brandon Hagel, Anthony Cirelli. It's like, that's just unfair.
Yeah.
But it does provide some sort of blueprint to some of those young players that have not participated in those tournaments before or have played that level of hockey in their NHL careers yet. And so I think it'll probably have more of an impact on them in the off season when they're training and they're saying, like, they're studying themselves and where they need to elevate their game to. Watching the players that are playing in this Four Nations tournament, I think will be a blueprint for them in the long term versus, whatever the Hawks have left in these 2 months of this season.
Great point. And you know what? I'd rather have them see it than be told about it.
Right.
Words at times become cheap and they fall on deaf ears. But when you watch it and you see it, you know it. And you're like, that's what it takes. If I want to be considered for the Olympic team next year, if I want to be considered for that 28 World Championship team coming up, I'm going to have to learn how to play inside the dots, get a little greasy, and do some of the dirty work that you're seeing at the highest level, and the pace and all. And again, we're not saying you're going to take what you saw over, 2 weeks and apply it to 27 games. And we're not saying that those players on the Blackhawks can, at their best, copy or mimic what they're seeing. But effort, energy level, the way you go about preparing and playing the game, you can take from that. And so as we get ready for these final 27 games, we transition to the Hawks. What do you think the mindset is in that room as they get ready for the final 2 months of the regular season?
I think it sounds cliche to say, but if they can finish this season, the final 2 months, just being competitive in a lot of these games and kind of eliminating the 5-1 losses or the 4-1s with, empty net, I think that could go a long way into going into the summer with some positive momentum, or it's saying like, okay, we finished the season on a positive note. Overall, the season did not go our way, but they can build on some of the positives that they took. And Connor Bedard was kind of implying, and Connor's always very careful with what kind of words he uses. And he kind of prefaced his comments by saying, not that we're looking ahead to next year already, but it was a way for him that if the overall team, Connor specifically as an individual, I'm sure wants to make sure that he finishes his season strong. But if as a team, they can get on the same wavelength, and Frank Nazar, Landon Slaggert, Alex Vlasic, all these pieces that are likely going to be here in the long term, as they start to gel more frequently, they can take that into the summer and be like, okay, we can build on what we built over the final 25-ish games of the year.
Yeah, I think the challenge for this team is, depending on who you are and where you're at in your career, how connected can this group stay the last 2 months? Because you've got the guys like you're talking about, the Slaggerts, the Bedards, the Nazars, the Vlasics, who are trying to solidify their role or lay the foundation of where they're at in this Blackhawks organization. And then you've got a bunch of guys that are on expiring contracts or are possible trade candidates here before the March 7th trade deadline. And, talking to a couple of them today, it's like, I was kind of like, well, what's your process like, as you think about your future? And he's like, I can't help but think about the future. I mean, you try to stay present, but, you've got a life, you've got kids, you've got a family. And so I think it's a challenge for all these different players and coaches, actually, for that matter as well, who, when you have a coaching change, there's no guarantee that this coaching staff is coming back together. We don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's 27 games for some clarity to happen. And so for this team to stay connected, I think that is everybody having their own thing to deal with, whether it's early on in their NHL career, midway through, or tail end of their career. I think the challenge is going to be, we all have our stuff. Let's try to check it at the door when we come to work. Let's try to go out there for 60 minutes, check that stuff at the door, and let's try to be a connected group on game days and practice days. And then reality seeps back in when we drive home.
That's a great point. I think I'm curious to see what this team is going to look like after the March 7th trade deadline, because there's still a lot of veterans on this roster. Pat Maroon, Alec Martinez, Ryan Donato. Obviously, you have Nick Foligno as the captain. But at some point, it's going to be Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, Landon Slager, Alex Vlasic. It's their locker room. And you could even argue maybe it already is, but they're still kind of in the wings of the veterans, still learning from them. So if March 7th rolls around and Donato is gone, Maroon is gone, potentially Martinez, I think it feels like it's up to him that whether he wants to stay or go. A Connor Murphy, I'm not sure. But like at some point, the young guys are going to look around and say, this is our room now. Like, let's unify together and let's make a run. And so maybe if we're looking at the final month of the season after the trade deadline, maybe that's an area where you're like, okay, will we see some growth in those final 4 weeks where some of the young guys are taking it upon themselves to elevate their games and say, okay, going into next year, it's going to be closer to our locker room versus like we're going to be the young people still looking up to the veterans. So, and then obviously you mentioned, we mentioned this on previous podcasts, but like at some point, like guys like Ryan Green and Sam Renzel and Artem Levshinov, like they're going to probably graduate to the NHL or they're going to sign their ELCs. Levshinov obviously still in Rockford, but with some of the college guys, you wonder if they're going to get a taste of NHL action at the end of the season where the younger guys can at least look around and say, all right, we're getting closer. Now we just have to, each guy's on their individual timeline, but let's take control as a unit for the guys that are going to be here for the long term.
All right. The report came out on Wednesday morning that Blackhawks legend Bobby Hull, the two-time Hart Trophy winner, posthumously was diagnosed with stage 2 CTE. He is the most prominent player to date afflicted with the disease that stems from repeated blows to the head. Concussions always a topic of conversation, not only in the National Hockey League and hockey in general, but across the sports landscape. And I take you behind the curtain. Phil Thompson, Chicago Tribune, was doing a story on this, talking to Connor Murphy on Wednesday. I had a sidebar piece of that conversation and listening in, and it was really interesting to hear, from a player like Connor Murphy, who you'll remember a couple years ago had to leave the ice on a stretcher and dealt with concussions, and he talked about going to Detroit in an offseason and seeking help from an expert in the field. And they took this scan of his brain and showed him where they felt like some of the incidents that could have been concussions or not have occurred. And it was an education for him in concussions. And I do believe over the years, we have seen a increased awareness into this and some acceptance, maybe not soon enough, maybe not total acceptance from everybody, but we've seen steps taken where I think training staffs, medical staffs take this very seriously. I think the spotters that have been implemented over the last few years play a role in this. I think players to a person take ownership of their own bodies and where they're at. And so if they don't like the course of treatment or what they're hearing, they may have their agent reach out. Oh, talk to another player in the league. Oh, he went here, I'll go there. You know, that type of thing. So has it been perfect? No. But I do feel we've seen in recent years a better understanding of what concussions can lead to, what we need to do to prevent, hopefully, CTE, and that by resting between hits and, you know, monitoring and seeing if the player can come back and, you know, getting the medical background, if whether or not the suggestion should be, you should stop playing this sport because of the physicality. And, oh, by the way, while we all loved what we saw at the start of that U.S.-Canada game in the first 10 seconds, are we hypocrites in that? Do we need to relook at, you know, what we like about the sport, the physicality about the sport, and it's some of its side effects? So, I mean, it's a complicated issue, and it could go on for years and years, and it has, and it will. But I will say, being around the sport the last 30 years, I've seen it improve, and there's still room for improvement.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of encapsulate, I think, what a lot of people are thinking. And it's funny because my mind went the same place you went, where here's the hockey world or just the casual sports world that's rooting on Team USA and Team Canada and watching 3 fights in a 9-second span. And I think the difference between that situation and the guys like Bobby Hall, the era that they played, is back then there wasn't really any research on the brain. And so it's like you're fighting, they're hitting or whatever. And then over the course of time is when you're realizing, hey, these are some of the side effects that happened while you were playing that nobody knew about at the time. So when I see Matthew Tkachuk and Brandon Hagel drop the gloves, in my mind, I'm not necessarily supporting them beating each other in their brains, but I think there's an understanding within the players that are playing now that it's like you kind of know what you're signing up for when you do that, because we're starting to see some of the research that's coming out that if you go down this road, this is what could happen to you. And so that's how I reconcile both of them. I'm not sure if it's right or not, but just kind of adding some text or some context. And 2, I've seen some significant growth in the NHL where there's far less staged fights. If you can ignore the USA-Canada game, you don't see the guys that are just lining up across a faceoff to say, hey, do you just want to go just for the fun of it? You know, it's more so those fights happen after a big hit or an illegal hit where it's like, hey, you're not going to touch our guy, we're going to go after you. The blindside hits have really decreased, that they literally implemented a rule where the blindside with Matt Cook was obviously the big proponent in that, where he basically got the NHL rule change because he was like a headhunter. And also you think about the era that Bobby Hall grew up in, they didn't have helmets. So it's another kind of layer that you wonder, like, I don't know how they played while doing so. The thing too that stood out to me, like, I don't know, do you remember obviously I'm sure you remember in 2009 when the Hawks were playing the Red Wings in the playoffs, and Marty Havlat had a big hit, or Nicholas Kronwall crushed Marty Havlat, and he was concussed on the ice, and the Hawks played a game 2 days later, and Havlat played in that game. Now you see a big hit like that guy is out for at least a couple weeks. You know, like, so there have been steps even from 2009 where you see a big hit like that, you just automatically rule out that he's going to be on the sideline for a while. There was a mic'd up video a few years after that, I think it was like an HBO Winter Classic leading up to it, where 𝗗cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 was mic'd up, and Jonathan Toews had a big hit on him, and the concussion spotter said Toews has to come out. And Toews is looking at 𝗗cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 and he's saying, I'm fine. And 𝗰𝗶𝗹 saying, you got to do it. You got to do it, Johnny. Go. And so that dialogue wasn't happening years prior, like even 5 years prior. So there has been strides. Is it ever going to be perfect? Probably not. But as long as the league and the players are instilling themselves with knowledge and they're taking proper steps to at least minimize those moving forward, I think that's really all we can do.
Yeah, if the sport continues to go towards eliminating headshots and the blindside hits, I think you're taking the steps in the right direction. I honestly don't know how you tackle the fighting aspect. I've heard talks about, it's your body not ready for it that leads to some concussion. I'm not going to pretend to be a physician on this podcast. Obviously that is a major topic that, we can't sit here and say how great the US-Canada start was, and then also say like, well, I really hope, they consider, head trauma and have the best interest in these players' minds in front of them when that is condoned. So, I mean, again, this is a complex issue, and there is an inherent risk. And we have seen steps. Again, more steps need to be taken. I want to kind of to wrap things up. Again, talking about the hockey family and the Blackhawks. A key member, Kevin Dean, the assistant coach. It was announced just before the St. Louis game, before the Four Nations break, that he had underwent successful prostate cancer surgery. And he was back watching Blackhawks practice the last couple of days, Charlie. And it was good to see him around, as we heard Anders say, joking around with the players. And as much as he probably needs that support, they need it as well. And that was good. That was good to see.
Yeah, it was scary when we found out the news, but then fortunately, it sounds like they caught it early, so it wasn't an advanced stage, which I guess was a blessing in disguise that they did find it when they did. I also, when we were told this information, I guess like my mind went to, oh, how's Kevin doing or whatever. And I guess when he was sharing to the team that he had got it, he was like already moved on. Like, I'm good. More so just wanted to let you guys know to make sure that you're getting checked. And he didn't want any of the tension surrounding him. It was more so if he can raise awareness by spreading the word, then that's a positive. And so it sounds like he'll be around the team, but he can't hit the ice for a few weeks or however long it's going to be. But the fact that he was around the team, positive spirits, is an encouraging sign. So get well soon to Kevin Dean, but it was nice to see him at practice today.
Yeah. And again, as you said, early detection was the key in his prognosis. And that's what he's trying to convey to people out there. Get checked out regularly. And if you do go through something, have it caught early. On that note, that is going to do it for the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN, brought to you by Toyota. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.